Steve is kind of like a giant lamb. But he will lean over to you at the dinner table and whisper something to you that'll make you sleep with the lights on for a couple of months.
He's come from nothing to being one of our wealthiest writers.
He's an actor when he writes. He's a character actor. I've got a film career because of Stephen King.
I like to have my hooks into the reader entirely. And really, if I had my druthers, I'd have somebody in a situation where they would get to the end of chapter 9 and say, I think I'll sleep with the light on.
He's often seen strictly as a horror novelist, but he's anything but. Fright drives his work and is sort of the engine behind the reader's response to it, but his work is a lot more significant than people give it credit for.
Hello? Anybody here?
Do I like to scare people? Yeah, I do. And do I like the idea that I'm referred to and sometimes dismissed as a horror writer? No, I don't.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Stephen. Happy birthday to you. Yeah.
When Stephen King turned 50, the best-selling American author celebrated the end of his 5th decade, not in a bookshop surrounded by writers, but on a film set with movie stars. And stars don't come much bigger than Tom Hanks, the head warder in The Green Mile, an adaptation of one of King's prison stories.
I know what I'm wishing for, and I'm wishing for, I can't say it out loud, that I want this to be the #1 picture and win all the Academy Awards, because that would make the wish not come true. But if I was going to say it out loud, it'd be something like that.
Have we just been jammed?
Usually you throw around the names, you know, Stephen King, and you think you're going to be getting this very particular kind of brand of a horror story. And this is really not. This is really more of like it's more of a mystery than it is anything else. Not unlike, you know, the better aspects of the Shawshank Redemption with some other, you know, elements to it that, you know, make it a extremely compact story all at the same time. I gotta tell you, it's so compact that we're all going nuts, because working on this movie is just like working, you know, in a minimum security prison, you know. We're free to roam the halls, but we can't leave. We go to the same place every day. It's very grim. It's very dingy. I mean, it's atmospheric, but it's not a real pleasant atmospheric.
The Green Mile is a story about a series of miracles on death row in Cold Mountain Penitentiary.
What do you want, John Coffey?
Just to help.
He's such a traditional storyteller, really. When I compare him to Mark Twain, I'm really not being at all facetious. He's very much a traditionalist in weaving a tale, which is sort of what leads me by the nose back toward a more traditional kind of filmmaking.
He somehow is able to really create these characters that are flawed but good, by and large, and also characters who are flawed and evil, you know, or actually are characters who are positive and evil at the all at the same time. So it's not like, you know, it's not like a matter of one set is good at two shoes and the other people are, you know, the strict heavies. I think you always are able to understand the motivations of the people who are bad.
Over the last 25 years, King has become the most popular novelist with Hollywood filmmakers. Almost all of his books have been turned into movies or television. He made his name back in the 70s with horror classics like Carrie and The Shining. But as with all of King's work, his stories are also about deep emotional trauma and are set in a world that's familiar and even humdrum.
One thing that he did that Steven Spielberg did in the realm of fantasy was ground it in the real world. You see references to brand names, people eat at McDonald's, they shop at Kmart, they do all the things that we do in the real world that you weren't used to seeing in television and films.
He took horror out of the creaky old castle in Transylvania and really placed it next door.
Maine is the setting for almost all of King's fiction. It's a sparsely populated region close to the Canadian border, and on the surface, one of the most beautiful and serene places in America. But he's turned it into the bloodiest, creepiest, most frightening state in the Union.
Maine is basically a backwoods state, and it's very poor. It's one of the last places in America that's actually a region. In Maine, you have people who have a very distinctive accent, so that outlanders sometimes have trouble understanding them. Most of them dress exactly the same way. They're missing a bunch of teeth. You know, they're wearing feedlot caps. They drive pickups. The rawness is still there. It doesn't have that bland quality that Americans tend to associate with the words suburbia.
The real violence in the United States is committed by people who feel very much like they're on the margins of success or the margin of popularity. And I think King has penetrated what that's all about, and he's found it by staying in Maine.
Stephen King has spent most of his life in Maine. He was brought up by his mother in the tiny town of Durham, so small it doesn't even have a main street. His father disappeared when he was very young.
When I was 2, he left. He just bugged out, gone. And we moved around a lot after that, and I think that she was looking for him, trying to get him to pay support. She died of cancer. And toward the end, she had all this medication, all this dope, and she was stoned most of the time. And when I was visiting her near the end, she said, you know, Stephen, for a while, just before World War II, your father was a vacuum cleaner salesman. And she kind of chuckled in this dreamy way that people do when they're doped. And she said, your father was the only salesman Electrolux ever had who could sell vacuum cleaners to widows at 2 o'clock in the morning. This is where I went to grammar school. We moved here when I was, I think, 8, and I was in the 5th grade. Went to 5th, 6th, 7th grade here, and I was definitely the smartest pupil in my class because there were only 3 of us, and there was one kid who was a stutterer, and the other one was mentally enfeebled, and then there was me. It hasn't changed as much as I thought. This road used to be all dirt when I was a kid. But the Harrington's house is still over there, and that's my aunt's house down there, the brick one. And, you know, we used to pick blueberries in this field until they turned it over for beans, and that's where we went. We didn't have running water either, and that's where we went to get a shower. If we wanted a shower or a bath, we'd walk down across the field and go there. When I was a kid, we'd come down here and fish. Nobody ever went swimming.
Hey, you know, it's not that deep. You can walk across.
One hot day, we decided, what the hell, we're all gonna go swimming. There was about 6 or 7 of us down here, you know, just goofing around, and we had our inner tubes and stuff. You paddle around in them, and...
You die, Chambers!
This one friend of mine, David Hanna, did a handstand, and his feet came right up out of the water, and holy shit, he's covered with these black things. They're all over his legs. You know, he's a redhead. He's a little chubby pink legs.
Vern, there's something on your neck. Yeah, right. I'm not falling for that one a chance. No, Vern, there is something on your neck. It's a leech.
And I took a look at that, and I go, Jesus, I cannot believe that. We got to get out of here. So we all go out, and we were covered with them. We were covered with bloodsuckers. And we picked them off each other the best way that we could, and we're all crying, and this, my cousin, Robbie Donahue, saying, be careful, if you pull them too hard, you'll leave their mouths in them, and they'll infect, and all this other stuff. So we're pulling them off, and some of them are dropping off because they're full. And then I hear this one kid saying, oh my God, look at this. And he's got his bathing suit out like this, and he's looking in his bathing suit. And he's going, Steve, help me. You gotta help me. You gotta get it off. I says, I'm not reaching inside your bathing suit, Chris, man. I'm not doing that. You'll have to. So he reached down, and he brought his hand out, and his hand is just covered with blood. He got the thing off. The thing was huge. It had battened on his testicles. It had gotten in his bathing suit somehow, battened on his testicles. And he said, here he is. And he just, his eyes rolled up, and he went right over backward in a dead faint. And about 10 years later, I was working on this story called The Body that became a film, Stand By Me. And I was thinking about that, and I stuck that in there, and I stuck in everything that I could remember from the time. It was no big plan to write about my past, to write about childhood. Just a bunch of kids going down a railroad track to find a dead body. And I found that I had something where I could basically hang a lot of the things from my childhood. Boring stories nobody would want to hear otherwise.
If you look at his descriptions of childhood, he represents it as a pretty embattled state, in which mainly one's relief is to be found in the loyalty of those other children who will befriend you, and in the exercise of imagination.
Hey, Gordo, why don't you tell us a story? I don't know. Oh, come on. Yeah, come on, Gordo. Not one of your horror stories, okay? I don't want to hear no horror stories. I'm not up for that, man.
Why don't you tell us one about Sergeant Steele and his battling leathernecks?
Well, the one I've been thinking about's kind of different. It's about this pie eating contest. And the main guy of the story is this fat kid that nobody likes named Davy Hogan. Like Charlie Hogan's brother, if he had one. Good, Vern.
Millions of children have less than blissful childhoods, but very few of them turn out to be good writers. So it's not causal, you know. It's just that for a child who is a budding writer, the form of the childhood that is lived affects the eventual prose.
Most of his work is rooted in a childhood trauma, a violation of a child. The plot may have to do with a character as an adult, but somewhere in that book, you're going to find that the character is defined by a childhood event.
Harry Davis used to live in this house. He's an old farmer. We used to cut his hay, and he came by. I was walking with my friend Chris, and he's a little skinny man with horn-rimmed glasses. He says, "Where you going, boys? Jump in." We said, "Well, we're just going up the road." And he said, "Jump in. I don't have anything in the trunk but a load of dead bodies." And we kind of went, well, maybe not, maybe not. Well, he ended up in Togus a few days later. He'd had a total nervous breakdown. It's just, and nobody ever talked about it, just life in the country. He had a kid, you talk about that, Tommy Davis. He used to read the paper. He was about 9. He'd read the obituary column and then cross the names out of the telephone book. That's true. This is where I grew up, here. This was our house, the old Hood place. It's changed a lot, but that was my bedroom up there, you see. I wrote 2 books that were eventually published in that room. One of them, Rage, which has since been withdrawn from publication because it's about a kid who takes a gun to school and starts shooting his classmates with them. I've written a lot of books about teenagers who are pushed to violent acts. But with Rage, it's almost a blueprint in terms of saying, this is how it could be done. And when it started to happen, particularly, there was a shooting thing in Paducah, Kansas, where 3 kids were killed in a prayer group. And the kid who did it, that book was in his locker. And I said, that's it for me, that book's off the market. Not that they won't find something else, and not that, you know, I don't think that any kid was ever driven to an act of violence by a Metallica record or by a Marilyn Manson CD or by a Stephen King novel, but I do think those things can act as accelerants. And the real question about violence in America, as opposed to, say, the violence in England or Scotland, those places, is you only have to correlate one thing, and that is the difference in the availability of guns. Guns is what it's really about. But there's a whole culture of violence in this country, and I'd be the last person to deny that I'm a part of that, but I'm only a child of my culture.
King's fascination with teenage violence started early. Barely 10 years old, he kept a rather odd scrapbook. It featured 50s America's most notorious serial killer, Charlie Starkweather. Starkweather went on a killing spree in Nebraska and Wyoming with his 14-year-old girlfriend, Carol Ann Fugate, slaying 11 people, including Fugate's mother and father.
In the cattle town of Douglas, Wyoming, end of the trail for a smart aleck gunman. Components of his arsenal are shown here after he was taken into custody. A trail of 11 killings from Lincoln, Nebraska into Wyoming. A 3-day spree until Charles Starkweather, 19, landed behind prison bars.
He was the first outrider of a new age. And serial murder has become a kind of touchstone experience worldwide, not just in America. But as in so many other things, I think that when it comes to serial murder, America does lead the way. But in the 50s, that sort of thing didn't happen, or at least it didn't happen very often. I kept the scrapbook because I wanted to know what to look for and what to avoid. There was a total double zero in that kid's face. I really did see something in there that was inhuman. But I don't mean inhuman like demonic. It was like double zero on a roulette wheel. Nothing. No good, no evil, just whatever there is, you know, somewhere out there between the Milky Way and the next galaxy. He was, you know, hey, the lights are on, but nobody's home. And I had the idea at 10 that if I sort of committed his, not just his face, but his MO to memory, that I could avoid people like that. And I think probably there's a hot circuit somewhere inside, even at 10, you're the potential of the person that you're going to be. And yeah, I suppose he called to me. As story material, he called to me. Or there was a voice inside that said, this is the guy, you're going to spend your life writing about this kind of evil. So here's where you start. This is the starting line.
If Starkweather provided the spark which ignited King's fascination with horror, going to school only served to fuel the flames.
I hated school. Anybody who looks back on the years from 14 to 18 with any enjoyment, I don't trust those people, okay? If you liked being a teenager, there's something really wrong with you. That's my view, because I look back on those days with sort of, please, I never want to have to go there again, because I always felt like I was wearing the wrong clothes. I always felt like I had too many spots on my face, and I really didn't have bad acne at all. I was very lucky that way. When I look back on it from the perspective of my middle age, it seems to me that as a kid I was treated no more badly than anybody else, and better than a lot. And yet, at the time, when you're in that situation, I think that for most of us it feels like a nightmare a lot of the time. We feel adolescence is a difficult time.
I guess he was a good kid. I don't recall that there were any disciplinary problems, but in terms of sophistication and savoir-faire, he was a country bumpkin. I know that he had at times been the butt of jokes, and he had been plagued by older friends, older acquaintances, and they regarded him as somebody who was different.
He did have a certain level of frenziness and strangeness. He would always wear these bedroom slippers, no matter what the weather was. Sometimes because of poverty was the reason why he wore them, but he used to just wear them all the time, leave them around the house sometimes. He'd come up and visit, and just leave them there. And sometimes we'd have to, you know, here's your slippers, Steve. He read a lot, and horror classics, comics, strange mysteries. And you'd always see him walking around with a paperback in the back of his jeans. He was always just a little bit eccentric. But it was all right. He was Steve. He was cool.
King's desire to be a writer drove him to the University of Maine, where he read English. But they couldn't really teach him much about becoming a novelist.
He didn't need to learn how to write fiction in some way. He just sort of knew how to make scenes, how to create characters that you could get interested in, and how to maintain a kind of narrative sort of propulsion that carried you along. He is a serious writer with all the powers of the pop culture kind of magician, and he's managed to combine those two qualities in a way that seems to me unique. I mean, I don't know of anyone else in recent American culture who's done anything like that.
It was at the University of Maine that King met and married his wife, Tabitha. They soon had a baby and inevitably found it difficult to make ends meet.
Steve was very poor. He and Tabby at one point had a trailer that they could barely afford. They really couldn't afford. Steve in college was driving a laundry truck to make some money. He really had to scrape his way through school. Financially, I think he just barely made it. So he and Tabby are completely self-made.
And it was in these difficult circumstances, living in a trailer, with his wife working the night shift in a donut shop, that Carrie, King's first published novel, was written. But it was a book that almost never saw the light of day.
I threw it away, and she fished it out of the wastebasket. And I can remember real clearly that night I was in the bathtub smoking a cigarette, which used to be, I mean, this was the 70s, right? And the bathtub, it was a great setup for a trailer. You had the bathtub, and then you had the toilet right next, so you could just flick your ashes into the toilet and take a bath at the same time and drink a beer. You had all the comforts of home. All you needed was the transistor radio, and you could have the baseball at the same time. You're living in hog heaven. And she came in and she snapped off the radio and she put down the lid of the toilet and she said, "You ought to go on with this."
Carrie tells the story of an outcast high school girl who uses her supernatural powers to take revenge on her classmate tormentors.
She was based on a couple of girls. She was actually a composite. One of the girls made 2 or 3 efforts to break out of that mold of being the low chicken in the pecking order to always being the goat. And every effort that she made, like to change her look or to be vivacious or to get along with other people, was met with a more savage return of fire from the other kids, mostly from the other girls. Both of those girls are dead. Neither one of them made it out of their 20s. One of them married someone and had a couple of kids, and then apparently what I heard from the old hometown was that in a fit of that postpartum depression, she killed herself. And a lot of times women will use pills to do that, but she killed herself. I can remember somebody saying she killed herself like a man with a shotgun. And the other girl died of epilepsy. Got away from the overpowering mother finally and died of epilepsy.
Fresh from the dustbin, Carrie went on to become his first bestseller and earned the poverty-stricken King a $200,000 advance. King could now afford to become a full-time writer, and he continued to find inspiration for his work in the little threatening things of everyday life.
I came home one day, Joe, my oldest boy, who was in 3 or 4, had done all these cartoons and crayon drawings on this manuscript that I'd been working on. And it was this sweet stuff like "Hello, Daddy," and cards and sons and big tall guys, you know, like kids draw with crayons where the legs look like Daddy Longlegs things. And I was thinking to myself, little son of a bitch, I could kill him. I could kill him. Look at this stuff. And that became the basis of The Shining.
Little pigs, let me come in. Not by the hair on your chinny chin chin. Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in.
The Shining is about a father who basically wants to eat up his child. And any parent goes through those moments. And to my mind, there's a kind of optimistic side to a book like The Shining, even at its darkest, because if a father is raging at a child, at least that father's there. For me, there was just this vacuum. I mean, it wasn't good, it wasn't bad, it was just nothing. It was this empty place.
Here's Johnny.
I think Steve was actually hurt by Kubrick's film. The book he wrote was all about alcoholism. It was all about feeling responsibility for a family and not being able to meet that responsibility. It's all about a boiler underneath a hotel that's going to blow and destroy it. That's a tremendous symbol for the Jack Torrance character as well. And those themes were the first things that I think Kubrick jettisoned.
It was a story that came from here. It came right from the heart. I don't know that Kubrick ever directed a movie from the heart. He always directed from here. I never saw a Stanley Kubrick film that came from here. So when you take this and you put it here, you're going to fail. It's that simple.
He seems to have been ignorant of the entire genre, so that when people come on and say, gee, Jack Nicholson seemed crazy from the beginning and we lost some of the tragedy, because to my mind, the arc of the book is that you're taking a decent man and seeing him warped to the breaking strain by this place, this haunted place. And if you want to say it's a haunted hotel, that's fine. You can say it's a haunted hotel. If you want to say it's a haunted place in him, you can say that as well. And if you want to look at it as an allegory, as a symbolic thing, you're welcome to do that. I don't necessarily do one or the other, but I've thought for a long time that what ghosts really are unburied secrets, you know, and bad conscience, and unaddressed psychological problems, which are all things that Jack Torrance exhibits in The Shining.
A succession of best-selling novels followed at the rate of more than one a year, and King quickly became the highest-paid writer in the world.
His success has been huge. I mean, his career evolved and unfolded at a time when the selling dynamics of the industry were changing, and they were changing in the favor of popular writers. I mean, suddenly a writer who might have a bestseller at 200,000 or 300,000 hardcover copies could have a bestseller at 800,000 copies, or 1,000,000 copies, or 1,400,000 copies. I mean, this is because hardcover books began to be sold in, you know, in warehouses, in price clubs, in supermarkets, suddenly hardcover books were in outlets that they'd never been in before.
Steve really has created a category of writer that didn't exist before, at least not in modern times, not in his lifetime. And you'd have to go back to Dickens or you know, people like that to find somebody as popular who was also considered a legitimate writer.
Sure, if it's going to go back to New York, and I think that's the best.
In the process, King became the biggest celebrity writer in America. He turned that experience into Misery, one of his most terrifying pieces of fiction.
Misery is about the price of fame.
Misery tells the story of romance writer Paul Sheldon, who gets rescued from a car wreck and nursed back to health by Annie Wilkes, played by Kathy Bates, his #1 fan.
I'm your #1 fan. There is nothing to worry about.
You're gonna be just fine. I'll take good care of you.
I'm your #1 fan.
I remember being in New York doing a play. I was staying with a college friend of mine, and he came in with the novel, Misery, hardbound, that he'd bought, and he'd just finished reading it, and he handed it to me, and he said, when they make this into a movie, you've got to do this.
She imprisons the writer in her house, forcing him to bring back to life her favorite character that he's killed off in his latest novel.
What's the matter? I'll tell you what's the matter. I go out of my way for you. I do everything to try and make you happy. I feed you, I clean you, I dress you, and what thanks do I get? Oh, you bought the wrong paper, Annie. I can't write on this paper, Annie. Well, I'll get your stupid paper, but you just better start showing me a little more appreciation around here, Mr. Man.
I described it when I was still writing jacket copy for his books as a love letter to his fans. But of course, it's a Stephen King love letter, you know. He's scared to death of them.
Misery, although was much more of was horrific, it was a very realistic, character-based horrific piece. I mean, it wasn't, you know, like Carrie or, you know, supernatural things were happening. It was based on something that could really happen to somebody. A person really could be kidnapped and tortured by a deranged fan. I mean, that kind of thing we know about, we read about in the papers and things like that.
Paul.
So if you'd like me to stay and play some more for you, I'd love
I know you've been out.
What?
You've been out of your room.
No, I haven't.
Paul, my little ceramic penguin in the study always faces due south.
I don't know what you're talking about. Ceramic penguin.
Is this what you're looking for?
Misery was good because of Rob Reiner. I think Rob did such a terrific job with it. He wanted to make it very real. And I remember him cutting, it was a scene that I really wanted to play, and he cut it because he was afraid the audience was going to laugh, and he didn't want to laugh there. But when the sheriff comes to the house, and he kills him by rolling over him with the lawnmower and chopping him all to bits. And oh God, I just loved it. I loved it. And the other thing I really wish we could have done is I wish we could have chopped his foot off.
Annie, whatever you're thinking about doing, please don't do it. Annie, for God's...
Shh, darling. Trust me.
God's sake.
It's for the best.
Annie, please!
Almost done. Just one more.
To me, going from scalpel to knife to axe was just, that was the range of the grand guignol that was Annie Wilkes. So going from scalpel to knife to sledgehammer just kind of didn't work for me. I really thought, and the way in that she cauterized it with a blowtorch. I mean, that was just, there was such a sense of simplicity and logic about that, that I was sorry that we couldn't replicate that in the film. It would have been very difficult to replicate it.
God, I love you.
For most of his career, King's art has imitated his life. But after Misery, he had personal experience of the horror of life imitating art when a demented fan broke into his home.
This guy, who's obviously crazy, was standing in the kitchen amid the broken glass, and he had a shoebox in his hands. And my wife says, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" She's in her nightgown and bare feet. And the guy said, "This is a bomb. Stephen King stole my novel, Carrie, and my novel, The Shining, and my novel, Misery, and I'm gonna blow him up, and myself too." And Tabby didn't bother to ask any more questions. She just turned around and booked it out of the house. And she went across the street and called the police. The police came, and the guy had holed up in an attic room. He came out when the police told him to come out. His bomb, which he apparently did believe was a bomb, was pencil erasers wired up with paper clips that he'd straightened and plugged into the erasers. This is just one of the outgrowths, none of them particularly good, of a celebrity culture, which is one of the reasons why I don't do many interviews like this.
He's moved out of the famous writer category into the famous person category. So he's like a film star. And when that happens, it means you have to close in. You know, you have to put up the walls a bit. It's uncomfortable to walk around because everybody is going to ask him for an autograph. And his privacy is up for grabs.
Fair ball, fair ball. Go, baby, take three. Go when you nice work! All right,
The price of fame hasn't been so high that he's been forced to move from Maine. He still plays in his local softball game every week.
I stay because everybody knows me and I know everybody, and as a writer, I stay for the same reason that William Faulkner stayed in Mississippi, because there are only so many places in the world that are yours that you can really know and really describe. And I think that people are the same everywhere. I think that friendship still matters, love still matters, hate, covetousness, all the things that people do covering up their secrets, fear of the unknown. All these things are interesting, and they're always the same from place to place and culture to culture. But you don't have very much time, and it's only given to you in 60 or 70 years to get to know one or two places well. And Maine's a place that I know well. I know how they talk, and I know what the customs are, the customs of the country, so to speak. And on a real basic level, I love this place. I love the people. This is my home.
He lives a real life, and which is, I guess, one of the reasons why he's so prolific, because he lives life. He's in the life. He's in the world. And he's one of the things that in general grabs me about him as a writer is that he's such a great observer of humanity. And he creates these fantastic characters, but they're all grounded in a reality that's so rich.
I'm a writer, not even second or third or fourth. The first thing I am is a husband. The second thing I am is a father. And there's a time when I probably would have put fatherhood ahead of husbandhood when the kids were small. The third thing I am is I'm a man of my place and my time and my community. And I have to be all those things first, because if I want to be a writer, everything trickles down.
On the surface, King seems to live the perfect writer's life. But he's had a monumental struggle with the torments and horrors of some powerful personal demons.
When I first began working with him, we went to a bar when he was in New York, and we sat down, and I ordered a beer, and Steve ordered 3. You know, but he's a big guy. He's not as big now as he used to be. But I thought, okay, there's a guy who doesn't want to wait for a second one, and he doesn't want to wait for his third one either. Whatever compulsion is in his work all the time. And if addiction, including an addiction to alcohol, is a compulsion, and I think it certainly is, I think that's got a grip on him. And I think it's got a grip on him because he's been trying to get out of its grip. I mean, he is a recovering alcoholic. He's a recovering substance abuser. Neither of these problems got in the way of his writing, amazingly enough. But they did get in the way of his life.
I never met a drink or a drug that I didn't like. And if I could take it, I took it. And I had a huge capacity for alcohol. I had a huge liking for drugs, as long as it was something that was speedy. If it was any kind of an upper, Coke or anything like that, I wanted all I could get, and I couldn't stop until it was all gone. And the same was true with the booze. I would drink probably a 6-pack before dinner, and by the time the night was over, I would have sunk about a case. And the drinking was bad enough, but when you added the drugs, and I just started to do more and more, and I knew that I was flaming out, and there was just no way that I could seem to stop it. There are any number of ways to deal with that kind of addiction, but the bottom line is I had to recognize that I was a total addictive personality. I was a garbage head, basically, if I could get a hold of it. It didn't make any difference for me. You know, cough medicine, Robitussin or NyQuil was every bit as good. Mouthwash, aftershave, anything. If it had Ambisol, the stuff that you rub on your gums, if it was alcohol and I could get it into my system, I got it into my system. I had things that I liked better than other things, but you know, in the end, the only option is you can't do it anymore.
Don't say a goddamn word.
The book which marks the beginning of his battle with the booze is Dolores Claiborne. It features a recurring theme in King's fiction, the murder of an alcoholic and abusive father.
So what?
in Dolores Claiborne with the alcoholic father, some of the reactions there, some of the things that I know about drinking from having been a drunk. But a lot of the things that Joe St. George goes through in that book are based on stories that I heard and people that I observed, because one thing, thank God, I was never a mean drunk. You would have liked me.
Big old smiley moon. This is just for you.
Want to see the dark side? Yeah, I guess it is pretty funny.
Yeah. Hope you haven't been walking around like that all day long.
Why the hell you make me do it?
Stephen King has made a fortune from scaring the pants off his millions of readers, but his estimated $40 million a year income can't protect him from facing up to the frightening prospect that he might be going blind.
I have macular degeneration, but it's not in an active phase. There's a thinning of the retinas. A lot of times, macular degeneration, the people who suffer from it, it's a disease of advanced age, and mine is related to extreme myopia, which is extreme nearsightedness. It's genetic. What happens is, finally, that retina thins through, and it's like getting a hole in your shoe. There's no real cure for it yet. If you ask me how it would be to be blind, I don't know, because I've never been blind, thank God. My eyesight isn't very good. We're not using these with the interview because they're fairly distorting. You know, I wear these Coke bottles, and I've got some problems with my vision, but I still do see. And so who knows? I mean, without writing, I guess I'd go on. I mean, look at Christopher Reeve. For Christ's sakes, he fell off a horse, got paralyzed from the head down, and yet he's adjusted and he's gone on with his life.
Even if King goes blind, it won't stop him writing. And as he approaches late middle age, he seems to be getting the critical respect that's been denied him for most of his writing life.
I've been in the business for 25 years. I've been writing stories for 25 years. And I was dismissed as a hack at the beginning, and I was dismissed as probably a hack in the middle. And now that I'm getting a little bit nearer the end, I think that I've been accorded a certain degree of respect.
I've always had the feeling that he himself did himself a disservice once by describing his style as being the literary equivalent of Big Mac and fries, because that is a very memorable phrase, and it was used against him over and over in all kinds of reviews as a stick to beat him with. He probably should never have said it, because it makes it too easy to dismiss him. In America, at least, I think that attitude is really on the way out.
He reads every review he gets obsessively. And he does care, and he attends to what they say. In some fundamental way, I don't think what they have to say matters to him. I think his reputation matters to him.
At some level, I'm saying fuck the critics. The critics don't matter anyway, because in the end, either they're still reading you 50 years after you're dead or they're not. Nothing you can do about that. Really not anything you can do about critical reputation. You can't sit down to write a bestseller, and you can't sit down to write, you know, a critical darling of a book like Moby Dick.